People rarely recognize the moment their certainty begins to fall apart, because it never arrives with thunder or applause. It arrives quietly, disguised as a single glance they cannot explain. Ethan Romano had spent nearly 4 decades building a life on certainty. As the respected head of the Romano family, he believed every important decision could be made with logic, discipline, and emotional distance. His tailored black tuxedo fit him as precisely as his reputation, flawless from every angle beneath the crystal chandeliers of Manhattan's most prestigious charity gala. Wealthy donors, business leaders, and politicians filled the ballroom with polished smiles and carefully measured conversations, while a string quartet drifted through the room like a familiar promise that everything important belonged to people who already had everything. Ethan accepted greetings with calm confidence, shaking hands, exchanging polite remarks, and never allowing his emotions to linger on any face for longer than necessary. Relationships complicated judgment, attraction weakened discipline, and assumptions simplified life. That philosophy had never failed him. When one of his longtime associates joked about introducing him to another successful woman attending the event, Ethan smiled faintly before answering with the casual certainty that only someone completely convinced of his own opinions could possess. "I'm not into black women." He did not raise his voice, nor did he intend cruelty. To him, it was simply another preference spoken without reflection, another sentence that disappeared into the elegant background noise of expensive laughter and clinking crystal glasses. His companions nodded. The conversation shifted, and Ethan believed the moment had already passed. Then the ballroom doors opened. Monica Carter entered wearing a deep red evening gown that seemed designed not to demand attention, but to carry quiet confidence wherever she walked. The rich crimson fabric flowed naturally with every step, elegant without excess, graceful without effort. She was a beautiful plus-size black woman whose warm smile reached people before her words ever did. Her natural curls framed, expressive eyes filled with calm intelligence instead of self-consciousness, and there was something remarkably peaceful about the way she carried herself, as though she had long ago stopped asking the world for permission to belong. She never looked toward Ethan. Instead, she greeted an elderly couple near the entrance with genuine affection, embracing the woman carefully before bending slightly to hear the man's soft voice over the music. Ethan noticed himself watching far longer than he intended. He told himself it was only because her red dress contrasted beautifully against the golden ballroom lights. But that explanation lasted only seconds. What truly held his attention was the ease with which everyone around her relaxed. Servers smiled as she thanked them by name. Volunteers brightened when she offered encouragement. Even strangers seemed to stand a little taller after exchanging only a few words with her. She moved through the room with quiet dignity that could not be purchased, borrowed, or rehearsed. Ethan accepted another conversation with a financial executive, yet his focus drifted again. Across the ballroom, Monica paused beside a young catering assistant whose tray had begun to wobble beneath the weight of champagne glasses. Before anyone else reacted, she gently steadied the tray with one hand and offered a reassuring smile that immediately dissolved the young woman's embarrassment. No grand gesture followed. No audience applauded. Monica simply wished her a wonderful evening and continued walking as though kindness required no recognition. Ethan found himself staring after her. Something about the simplicity of that moment unsettled him more than any dramatic display ever could. His carefully organized assumptions began to feel strangely incomplete, as though a piece of a familiar puzzle had quietly disappeared without his noticing. Around him, conversations continued about investments, charitable foundations, and social influence, but their words faded beneath an unfamiliar question that refused to leave his mind. Why could he not stop watching someone he had already convinced himself he would never notice? Across the ballroom, Monica laughed, softly at something an elderly guest had whispered, completely unaware that the man who believed he understood exactly who he was had just taken the first step toward discovering how little he truly knew about himself. The rest of the evening unfolded exactly as every prestigious charity gala was expected to, with polished speeches, generous donations, and conversations carefully balanced between genuine generosity and quiet ambition. Yet Ethan Romano found himself listening without truly hearing because his attention kept returning to the same woman in the red dress. It irritated him more than he cared to admit. He had trained himself for years to remain focused regardless of distractions. But Monica Carter was unlike any distraction he had ever encountered because she was not trying to attract anyone at all. While influential guests gathered around prominent donors hoping to exchange business cards and introductions, Monica seemed naturally drawn toward people who had nothing to offer her in return. She thanked every member of the catering staff with the same sincere smile she offered the evening's largest contributors. She paused to compliment the floral designer on the arrangements that most guests walked past without noticing. When one of the elderly volunteers struggled to carry several event programs after the scheduled presentation ended, Monica quietly stepped beside her, taking half the stack without making the woman feel incapable. Ethan watched from across the ballroom as they laughed together over something neither of them expected anyone else to understand. It was a small moment, almost invisible beneath the elegant noise surrounding them, but somehow it lingered in his thoughts far longer than the keynote speech delivered by one of the city's most respected philanthropists. One of Ethan's business associates eventually noticed where his attention had settled and glanced toward Monica with mild curiosity. The man smiled knowingly before mentioning that Monica had become one of the most admired community leaders in the city during the past several years. According to him, nearly everyone involved in local education and neighborhood development knew her name. Ethan responded with a polite nod, pretending the information carried little significance, yet a quiet question formed in his mind. If she was so respected, why had he never heard of her before? The answer arrived only minutes later without anyone intending to provide it. During the foundation's recognition ceremony, several volunteers were invited onto the stage. Monica's name was announced last, and the applause that filled the ballroom lasted noticeably longer than it had for anyone else. She accepted the recognition with visible humility, thanking teachers, volunteers, local families, and the countless people who had contributed their time rather than speaking about her own accomplishments. She never mentioned herself unless it was to redirect praise towards someone standing nearby. Ethan noticed something unusual. Even people who clearly held greater wealth than Monica looked at her with unmistakable respect. It was not the respect purchased through influence or inherited through powerful family names. It was something quieter and somehow stronger. After leaving the stage, Monica returned directly to the tables instead of remaining in the spotlight. A young volunteer approached her looking discouraged after accidentally misplacing several guest packets. Rather than correcting him publicly, Monica knelt beside him so they could search together without drawing unnecessary attention. Within a few minutes, they found the missing materials behind a decorative display, and the young man smiled with visible relief. Monica simply patted his shoulder and reminded him that everyone makes mistakes when they care enough to work hard. Ethan caught himself smiling before he immediately straightened his expression, surprised that such an ordinary exchange had affected him at all. He was accustomed to leadership built on authority, precision, and efficiency. Monica seemed to lead through patience, encouragement, and quiet example instead. Neither approach appeared weak, yet hers produced something he rarely witnessed inside boardrooms filled with accomplished people: genuine trust. As the orchestra began another soft arrangement and guests slowly returned to their conversations, Ethan realized he had spent nearly an hour observing someone who had not looked in his direction even once. There was no calculated performance, no attempt to impress anyone important, and no carefully crafted public image. Every thoughtful gesture appeared effortless because it reflected who she truly was rather than who she wanted others to believe she had become. For the first time in many years, Ethan questioned whether the certainty he had always trusted had actually prevented him from seeing remarkable people standing directly in front of him. Across the ballroom, Monica accepted a cup of sparkling water from a smiling server, thanked him by name once again, and continued speaking with a group of local teachers while Ethan remained exactly where he was, unable to explain why the distance between them suddenly felt much greater than the few yards separating opposite sides of the room. Long after the final applause faded and the evening came to a graceful close, Ethan Romano discovered that the image refusing to leave his thoughts was not the glittering ballroom, the impressive donations, or the influential guests whose approval had always carried weight in his world. It was the quiet confidence of Monica Carter. For reasons he could not explain, He found himself wondering what kind of life shaped someone who seemed completely untouched by the need to impress anyone. The following morning began like every other. Meetings filled his calendar from sunrise until late afternoon. Contracts waited for his signature. Financial reports covered the polished conference table inside Romano Enterprises. His executive team discussed expansion plans with the precision he expected, yet several times his attention drifted toward thoughts that had nothing to do with business. During a short break between meetings, Ethan casually asked his assistant if she had ever heard of Monica Carter. The assistant looked surprised for only a second before answering with an easy smile. She explained that Monica had founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing scholarships, mentorship, and career opportunities for underserved high school students across New York. Hundreds of young people had already graduated through programs Monica helped establish, and many successful professionals quietly volunteered because of the trust she inspired. Ethan listened without interrupting. None of the information sounded exaggerated. In fact, it sounded almost understated. Later that afternoon, curiosity quietly defeated pride. Ethan searched for the foundation online. Instead of glamorous interviews or carefully produced publicity videos, he found photographs of classrooms, libraries, neighborhood centers, and smiling students holding college acceptance letters. Monica appeared in many of the photographs, yet she was almost never standing in the center. She consistently positioned teachers, volunteers, parents, and students in front while remaining somewhere near the side, smiling with unmistakable satisfaction as though their success mattered far more than recognition for herself. He continued scrolling through article after article. Local newspapers praised the measurable impact of her scholarship initiatives. Community leaders described her as dependable rather than extraordinary, perhaps because extraordinary people often appeared ordinary while quietly changing lives every single day. One interview caught Ethan's attention more than any headline. When asked why she dedicated so much of her life to helping strangers, Monica answered with remarkable simplicity. She said that every child deserved at least one adult who believed in their future before they believed in it themselves. Ethan read the sentence twice, then a third time. It stayed with him throughout the afternoon. He had spent years measuring success through growth, influence, and strategic decisions. Monica seemed to measure success by opportunities created for people she might never meet again. A few days later, another invitation arrived, this time for a planning luncheon involving several charitable organizations interested in expanding educational partnerships throughout the city. Ethan accepted primarily because Romano Enterprises had become one of the largest financial contributors. When he entered the meeting room inside a historic Midtown building, conversations paused briefly as attendees greeted him respectfully. Moments later, the doors opened once again, and Monica entered carrying a simple leather portfolio instead of an expensive designer handbag. She greeted the receptionist first, thanked the event coordinator for organizing the luncheon, and then walked around the room shaking hands with volunteers before acknowledging prominent donors. Nothing about her behavior appeared rehearsed. It was simply consistent with the woman Ethan had observed days earlier. During the presentation, Monica outlined practical ideas for increasing scholarship access without dramatically increasing administrative costs. Her recommendations were thoughtful, realistic, and supported by measurable results rather than emotional promises. Ethan found himself listening more carefully than he had expected. She possessed the rare ability to speak with conviction while giving credit to everyone around her. When questions followed, Monica answered each one with patience and genuine respect, even when someone disagreed with her conclusions. The discussion ended with quiet admiration from nearly everyone present. As people gathered their notes and prepared to leave, Ethan remained seated for an extra moment, watching Monica thank the staff members responsible for arranging the meeting before collecting her own papers. She still had not noticed him watching. Or perhaps she had and simply chose to treat him exactly as she treated everyone else. For the first time in many years, Ethan realized he wanted someone to know him for reasons that had nothing to do with his family name, his influence, or the respect people automatically offered whenever he entered a room. Across the conference hall, Monica turned toward the exit with the same calm smile she carried everywhere, while Ethan quietly wondered whether the greatest discovery of his life had begun with a woman who had never once tried to change him at all. Over the following several weeks, Ethan Romano discovered that coincidence had a curious way of appearing whenever people were working toward the same purpose. Invitations to educational partnerships, community planning sessions, and charitable advisory meetings placed him and Monica Carter in the same room often enough that simple introductions could no longer be postponed. Their first real conversation happened after a morning presentation inside a restored public library overlooking Bryant Park. Most of the attendees had already drifted toward the refreshment tables, discussing budgets and timelines over coffee, while Monica remained behind to gather several folders left behind by volunteers. Ethan crossed the room with the calm confidence that had defined him for years, yet he noticed an unfamiliar hesitation beneath his polished composure. Monica looked up before he spoke and greeted him with the same warm sincerity she offered everyone else. There was no hint of intimidation in her expression, nor was there excessive admiration for his reputation. She simply smiled and extended her hand. "It is good to finally meet you properly, Mr. Romano." Ethan shook her hand gently and answered with a smile that felt more genuine than the practiced expressions he usually carried through professional gatherings. "Please call me Ethan." Monica nodded. "Only if you call me Monica." The exchange was brief, but something about its simplicity immediately dissolved the invisible distance that often surrounded people from different worlds. They began discussing the scholarship proposal from the previous meeting, and Ethan admitted that several of her recommendations had remained in his thoughts long after everyone else had moved on to other business. Monica thanked him without sounding surprised or overly pleased. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions about how business leaders evaluated long-term investments. Ethan explained how sustainable results depended on patience rather than dramatic short-term victories. Monica smiled and quietly observed that helping young people often followed the exact same principle. The comparison caught Ethan off guard because it connected two worlds he had always considered separate. As their conversation continued, he realized Monica listened with unusual attention. She never interrupted, never searched for opportunities to impress, and never treated disagreement as a personal challenge. Instead, she responded with curiosity that encouraged honest conversation rather than competition. Before long, they were discussing favorite neighborhoods in New York, memorable teachers from childhood, and the importance of adults who believed in young people before success became visible. Ethan found himself speaking more openly than he expected, sharing memories of his late grandfather whose discipline had shaped much of his life. Monica listened quietly before saying that people often carried the voices of those who first believed in them long after those voices were gone. Her words settled gently into the silence between them. Later that afternoon, the organizing committee toured a neighborhood community center scheduled to receive additional funding. Instead of remaining with executives discussing architectural improvements, Monica naturally drifted toward the classrooms where volunteers were preparing after-school activities. Ethan followed at a comfortable distance, pretending his interest remained focused on the facility itself. He watched Monica kneel beside several children who excitedly showed her handmade science projects. She celebrated each effort with genuine enthusiasm, asking questions that encouraged them to explain their ideas with confidence. Every child seemed eager to speak because Monica made each one feel important. Ethan could not remember the last time he had witnessed leadership expressed with such quiet generosity. As the visit concluded, one young girl presented Monica with a folded drawing created using colored pencils. Monica accepted it as though she had just received a priceless work of art, carefully thanking the child and promising to display it in her office. Ethan noticed the girl's smile grow brighter with simple pride. Walking toward the parking area together, Monica laughed softly after catching Ethan watching the exchange. She admitted that children's artwork had gradually taken over an entire wall inside her office. Ethan surprised himself by laughing as well, the sound arriving so naturally that he barely recognized it. Monica raised one eyebrow with playful amusement and remarked that she had not expected someone with such a serious reputation to have a genuine laugh. Ethan answered that perhaps he had forgotten what gave him a reason to use it. Their eyes met for only a brief moment before both looked away, but the warmth lingering in that quiet exchange remained with Ethan throughout the drive home. For the first time in many years, he realized that every meeting with Monica left him seeing the world through a slightly different lens, and somewhere beyond his awareness, Someone else had already begun noticing the subtle changes in the man who had always believed he would never change at all. The subtle changes in Ethan Romano did not escape the people who had known him for years because habits that remain unchanged for decades rarely shift without attracting attention. His younger cousin Dominic noticed first when Ethan declined an invitation to an exclusive private dinner in favor of attending another educational planning session. A longtime executive quietly remarked that Ethan seemed more interested in community partnerships than corporate acquisitions lately. Even his house manager smiled after seeing him leave home carrying folders about scholarship initiatives instead of financial reports. Ethan dismissed every observation with polite confidence, insisting that supporting education simply made good business sense. Yet deep inside he understood that explanation had become only part of the truth. The projects mattered because Monica Carter mattered, although he had not yet found the courage to admit that even to himself. One bright Saturday morning, their shared committee gathered at a neighborhood community garden that volunteers hoped to transform into an outdoor learning space for local children. Instead of formal suits and polished conference rooms, everyone arrived wearing comfortable clothes and work gloves. Ethan exchanged his tailored jacket for a simple navy button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms, while Monica appeared in dark jeans, walking shoes, and a lightweight red blouse that reflected the same quiet confidence as the elegant gown she had worn weeks earlier. The atmosphere felt refreshingly different from every luxury event they had attended together. Children watered flowers beside retired teachers. Local business owners planted herbs alongside college students. There were no reserved tables, no preferred guests, and no visible difference between those with influence and those without it. Monica moved naturally through every group, introducing strangers to one another until conversations formed as effortlessly as the flowers beginning to bloom beneath the spring sunshine. Ethan spent the morning helping volunteers assemble raised garden beds, occasionally glancing toward Monica without realizing how often his attention drifted in her direction. At lunchtime, the volunteers gathered beneath a shaded pavilion where homemade sandwiches, fresh fruit, and iced tea replaced expensive gala dinners. Ethan found an empty seat beside Monica, who thanked a teenage volunteer for preparing extra meals before turning toward him with an easy smile. Their conversation wandered from gardening to childhood memories before Ethan finally asked the question that had quietly remained with him since reading about her foundation. He wanted to know why she had devoted so much of her life to helping people she had never met. Monica looked across the garden where several children laughed while carefully planting tomato seedlings into freshly turned soil. She remained silent for a few thoughtful moments before answering. She explained that when she was growing up, her mother often reminded her that kindness was one of the few gifts that became larger every time it was shared. There had been seasons when her own family struggled financially, yet neighbors, teachers, and mentors had quietly opened doors that changed the direction of her life. She believed the greatest way to honor those people was by becoming that open door for someone else. Ethan listened without speaking because every word sounded sincere rather than rehearsed. Monica never described herself as generous. She simply described gratitude that had become a lifelong habit. Before Ethan could respond, several committee members approached to discuss upcoming fundraising plans. Among them was Victor Romano, Ethan's older uncle and one of the family's most influential advisors. Victor greeted everyone politely before studying Ethan and Monica with a thoughtful expression that lingered a little longer than necessary. His smile remained courteous, yet Ethan recognized the careful observation behind his eyes. During the drive home later that afternoon, Victor casually asked whether Ethan's growing involvement with the Education Foundation had become more personal than professional. Ethan answered calmly that Monica was one of the most capable nonprofit leaders he had ever met and that the foundation deserved strong support. Victor nodded without argument, but the silence that followed carried quiet concern instead of agreement. Meanwhile, Monica met her closest friend Denise at a small neighborhood cafe where they often ended busy weekends together. Denise noticed the warmth in Monica's smile, while she described Ethan's willingness to spend an entire morning working beside volunteers without seeking recognition. Even so, Denise gently reminded her that powerful people sometimes entered charitable work for reasons that had little to do with lasting commitment. Monica appreciated the concern because she understood it came from love rather than suspicion. She admitted that Ethan continued to surprise her in thoughtful ways. Yet she also believed that people from different worlds often faced obstacles neither could solve through kindness alone. As evening settled over the city and the lights of Manhattan reflected across the river, two separate conversations ended with the same quiet realization. Ethan was beginning to understand how deeply Monica had changed his view of the world, while Monica had begun wondering whether allowing herself to trust him might eventually require more courage than either of them yet realized. The weeks that followed brought a quiet rhythm neither Ethan Romano nor Monica Carter had expected, yet the closer their paths moved together, the more the world around them seemed determined to remind them how different those paths had always been. Their education initiative gained remarkable momentum as new volunteers joined the scholarship program and several local businesses pledged additional resources. Optimism filled every planning meeting until one unexpected email changed the atmosphere almost overnight. A major corporate sponsor that had promised significant funding abruptly withdrew its commitment, offering only a carefully worded explanation about shifting priorities. The official statement sounded professional, but private conversations soon revealed a different story. One influential board member had questioned whether the foundation's public image had become too closely associated with a woman who did not fit what some donors considered the ideal face of leadership. The criticism was never spoken directly to Monica, yet whispers traveled quickly through nonprofit circles. Ethan learned the truth from a longtime business acquaintance who reluctantly admitted that several wealthy contributors believed the organization would attract broader support with someone else representing it at public events. Ethan felt an unfamiliar disappointment settle over him, not because of the lost funding, but because people he had respected had chosen appearances over character. When he arrived at the foundation office the following afternoon, he expected to find frustration or discouragement. Instead, Monica sat at a conference table surrounded by volunteers, calmly reorganizing budgets and identifying alternative solutions. She thanked everyone for staying positive before outlining practical adjustments that would allow every existing scholarship to continue without interruption. Her steady voice carried neither bitterness nor resentment. After the meeting ended and the volunteers departed, Ethan remained behind. He finally asked the question that had been weighing on him since hearing the rumors. He wondered how she could remain so composed after discovering the real reason behind the sponsor's decision. Monica looked out the window toward the busy Manhattan sidewalk where people hurried through another ordinary afternoon, each carrying burdens invisible to everyone else. After a thoughtful silence, she answered quietly that anger could consume enormous amounts of energy without building anything meaningful. She smiled gently, before adding, "Anger is a poor architect." Ethan repeated the sentence softly, allowing its meaning to settle inside him. Monica explained that prejudice had visited her life more than once, but she had long ago decided that allowing someone else's limited vision to shape her own future would only give those opinions more power than they deserved. Every hour spent proving strangers wrong was an hour stolen from helping someone who genuinely needed encouragement. Ethan admired the quiet strength behind her words far more than he would have admired an emotional speech. She had transformed disappointment into purpose without pretending the disappointment had never existed. As they walked together toward the building entrance, Monica thanked him for caring enough to ask, instead of pretending nothing had happened. Ethan admitted he was still learning that silence and understanding were often more valuable than immediate solutions. Their conversation ended with an easy smile, yet neither realized they had been seen leaving together by a photographer covering another event across the street. Within days, a small society publication printed several photographs from recent charity functions, including one image of Ethan and Monica laughing during the community garden project. The article itself remained harmless, but speculation spread quickly through social circles accustomed to discussing influential families. Members of the Romano family soon began asking careful questions disguised as casual conversation. Victor Romano requested a private dinner with Ethan, while several relatives hinted that public perception mattered more than personal feelings. Ethan listened respectfully without revealing much, although every carefully chosen warning strengthened rather than weakened his growing respect for Monica. At the same time, Denise noticed that Monica had become more thoughtful after seeing the photographs online. Monica admitted she never wanted to become the reason Ethan faced unnecessary criticism from people whose opinions carried genuine influence over his family and professional responsibilities. She insisted that their friendship should never place his future at risk, even if that meant creating a little more distance between them. Denise recognized the sadness hidden beneath Monica's calm expression, but understood why she felt responsible for protecting someone she deeply respected. As another sunset painted the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and crimson, Ethan found himself reading Monica's words again inside his memory. Anger is a poor architect. He realized that the greater challenge ahead would not come from strangers or headlines, but from choosing whether he would continue constructing his life according to expectations that had always surrounded him, or according to the truth quietly taking shape within his own heart. The annual Education Leadership Summit arrived beneath a clear autumn sky, drawing business executives, university presidents, nonprofit directors, and civic leaders from across New York into one of the city's most respected conference centers. The foundation's recent progress had earned Monica Carter a featured place on the afternoon panel, while Ethan Romano attended as one of the event's principal financial partners. Although they had exchanged only a few professional messages since deciding to create a little distance, both understood the importance of the occasion. Monica stepped onto the stage wearing an elegant burgundy dress beneath a tailored black blazer, greeting fellow panelists with the same calm warmth that had become her signature. Ethan watched from the front row as she spoke with quiet confidence about expanding opportunities for students whose potential was often overlooked. She never exaggerated statistics or promised impossible outcomes. Instead, she shared practical stories about teachers, volunteers, and families whose commitment had created lasting change one student at a time. The audience listened attentively, and many took notes as she explained how consistent mentorship often mattered more than temporary financial support. During the question and answer session, one influential executive stood and adjusted his microphone before offering what sounded like a thoughtful question, but carried a sharper meaning beneath carefully chosen words. He wondered aloud whether charitable organizations seeking national recognition might benefit from presenting leadership that better reflected the image major corporate sponsors expected. The room became noticeably quieter. Nobody needed the remark explained. It was polite enough to avoid direct accusation, yet clear enough to leave an uncomfortable silence hanging over the audience. Monica remained composed. She thanked the executive for his perspective and began answering with her usual grace, explaining that lasting trust was built through measurable results rather than appearances. Before she could continue, another panelist attempted to redirect the discussion toward funding strategies, hoping to move beyond the uncomfortable moment. Ethan looked around the room and noticed something that unsettled him more than the question itself. Many people lowered their eyes. Others politely avoided reacting. Several executives who privately admired Monica's work remained silent because speaking carried professional risk. Ethan suddenly recognized that quiet agreement and quiet avoidance could produce the same result. He slowly rose from his seat. The movement drew attention throughout the ballroom as conversations stopped almost immediately. Ethan requested a microphone, and the moderator nodded respectfully. He began speaking with the calm confidence everyone expected from him, but this time his words carried a different purpose. He said that leadership should never be measured by whether someone matched another person's expectation of appearance. It should be measured by integrity, consistency, and the lives improved because of that person's work. He reminded the audience that Monica's organization had increased graduation rates, expanded scholarship opportunities, and built partnerships benefiting hundreds of students. None of those accomplishments depended on fitting anyone's preferred image. They depended on character, discipline, and compassion. Ethan paused briefly before admitting something even more personal. He confessed that several months earlier he had believed assumptions were harmless because they felt familiar. Meeting Monica had forced him to confront how incomplete those assumptions had always been. Real leadership, he continued, begins the moment people become willing to replace comfortable opinions with honest understanding. The ballroom remained completely silent. No one interrupted. No one looked away. Monica watched Ethan with visible surprise, not because he defended her work, but because he had publicly acknowledged his own growth without protecting his pride. After a few long seconds, applause began near the back of the room, where several teachers stood first. Volunteers joined them. Then university leaders, nonprofit directors, and finally many of the executives rose to their feet as the applause spread across the ballroom in a steady wave of genuine respect. The executive who had asked the original question quietly sat down without another word. Monica accepted the moment with characteristic humility, thanking Ethan with a small, grateful smile before returning the attention to the students whose futures remained the true purpose of the gathering. Yet everyone present understood that something important had happened beyond the scheduled program. Ethan had chosen principle over reputation in front of the very people whose approval had shaped much of his professional life. As guests slowly left the ballroom later that afternoon, whispers no longer focused on speculation about Ethan and Monica. Instead, people spoke about courage, integrity, and the rare power of someone willing to admit he had once been wrong. Even so, as Monica stepped outside into the cool evening air, she quietly wondered whether Ethan's public stand had come at a cost far greater than either of them could yet see. The days following the Education Leadership Summit felt strangely quieter, yet the silence surrounding Ethan Romano and Monica Carter carried more meaning than words ever could. Newspapers praised Ethan's remarks about integrity and highlighted the foundation's achievements, while community leaders reached out with renewed support. Even so, Monica sensed that public admiration often came with private consequences, and she refused to ignore the possibility that Ethan had placed his family relationships and professional standing under unnecessary strain because of his decision to speak. Rather than calling him as she normally might have after a successful event, she chose distance instead. She politely declined 2 committee lunches, delegated several meetings to trusted colleagues, and focused her attention on preparing a new scholarship cycle. Ethan noticed immediately. Their calendars still overlapped, yet somehow they no longer occupied the same rooms. Emails remained professional. Messages became shorter. The easy conversations that had slowly become the brightest moments of his week quietly disappeared. For several days he convinced himself she was simply busy, but when another meeting ended without Monica attending, he realized she was creating space intentionally. Instead of feeling frustrated, he found himself wondering what fear had led her to make that choice. Denise eventually answered the question without realizing how important her words would become. During a fundraising planning session, she mentioned that Monica believed the foundation should never become the reason Ethan lost the confidence of people whose support affected thousands of employees and community projects. Denise added that Monica cared too much about him to become the source of conflict in his life. Ethan remained silent long after the conversation ended. For the first time, he understood that Monica had not stepped away because she doubted her feelings. She had stepped away because she valued his future more than her own happiness. That realization carried a quiet weight unlike anything he had experienced before. The following Saturday morning, Ethan drove alone to the neighborhood community center where volunteers were preparing for the annual student mentoring fair. He found Monica arranging books on a display table while several teenagers decorated the gymnasium with handmade banners celebrating college acceptance letters. She looked genuinely surprised to see him, but greeted him with the same kindness she always offered. For a few minutes they worked side by side in comfortable silence, organizing supplies and greeting students as they arrived with excited families. Finally, after the last table had been prepared, Ethan asked if they could take a short walk outside before the program began. They crossed the small courtyard where autumn leaves drifted gently across the brick pathway beneath bright maple trees. Neither hurried to speak. The quiet itself felt honest. Ethan stopped beside a simple wooden bench overlooking the playground and admitted that he had finally understood why she had been avoiding him. Monica lowered her eyes briefly before acknowledging that she never wanted admiration for one's speech to become lasting pressure on his family or his career. She believed some sacrifices were easier to make early before deeper feelings complicated everything. Ethan listened carefully before answering with unusual vulnerability. He confessed that months earlier he had judged people through assumptions so automatic that he had never questioned them. Meeting Monica had changed far more than his opinion about one person. It had changed the way he understood dignity, leadership, and even himself. He explained that the choice he made at the summit had not been a sacrifice forced upon him. It had been the first decision in a long time that truly reflected the man he wanted to become. Monica's eyes glistened softly as she admitted something she had hidden from herself for weeks. She said she had tried to protect him because she cared about him more than she had ever intended. She had been afraid that hope would eventually become disappointment if the distance between their worlds proved impossible to cross. Ethan smiled gently and answered that every meaningful bridge in history had been built because someone believed two distant places deserved to be connected. Without another word, he slowly reached out his hand. Monica looked at him for a quiet moment before placing her hand in his with calm certainty rather than hesitation. Neither spoke because no dramatic declaration could have carried more meaning than that simple gesture. Around them, children laughed inside the community center as volunteers prepared another day filled with possibility, while the cool autumn breeze carried away the last traces of fear that had kept two honest hearts standing apart. Yet even as hope quietly settled between them, both understood that the greatest test of everything they had discovered together was still waiting just beyond the horizon. 1 year later, the same charity gala that had quietly altered two lives welcomed another evening beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers and warm golden light, yet the atmosphere felt profoundly different. The foundation Monica Carter had built now served more students than ever before, supported by new partnerships that stretched across New York and beyond. Scholarship recipients, teachers, business leaders, volunteers, and community families filled the grand ballroom, not because they were chasing prestige, but because they had witnessed what genuine commitment could accomplish when people chose character over assumption. Ethan Romano arrived without the emotional distance that had once defined every public appearance. His tailored black tuxedo remained as elegant as ever, but there was a quiet warmth in his expression that no one had seen during earlier years. He greeted volunteers before executives, paused to thank servers preparing the evening meal, and remembered the names of students whose stories had inspired him throughout the past year. The transformation was subtle enough that it appeared completely natural, yet everyone who had known him before understood how remarkable those changes truly were. As guests settled into their seats for the annual celebration, the ballroom doors opened once again. Monica entered wearing a breathtaking deep red evening gown, remarkably similar to the one she had worn the night Ethan first noticed her. The rich crimson fabric reflected the golden light with quiet elegance, but it was not the dress that drew every eye toward her. It was the confidence, kindness, and unmistakable dignity she carried into the room. Students hurried over to embrace her. Teachers smiled with genuine affection. Volunteers applauded spontaneously before the formal program had even begun. Monica greeted every person with the same warmth she had always shown, never allowing recognition to change the humility that remained the foundation of her character. Ethan watched her for a brief moment before walking across the ballroom to welcome her, and together they took their seats near the front without fanfare or unnecessary attention. Throughout the evening, scholarship recipients shared stories about becoming the first members of their families to attend college. Parents thanked mentors who had believed in their children during difficult seasons. Laughter mixed with grateful tears as ordinary people celebrated extraordinary perseverance. Finally, the master of ceremonies invited Ethan to the stage to recognize the foundation's newest achievement. He stood quietly behind the podium, looking across the audience before beginning with a calm honesty that immediately captured every heart in the room. He spoke about the importance of education, opportunity, and community, but after a thoughtful pause, his words became deeply personal. Ethan admitted that there had once been a time when he believed first impressions and comfortable assumptions were enough to understand another person. He confessed that he had judged without learning, spoken without reflecting, and allowed prejudice to disguise itself as simple preference. Looking toward Monica, he thanked her for never responding to misunderstanding with bitterness, but instead with patience, grace, and unwavering dignity. He said she had taught him that true beauty could never be measured by appearance alone because it was revealed through compassion, courage, humility, and the quiet decision to lift others every single day. Ethan acknowledged that the greatest investment he had ever made was not financial at all. It was choosing to become a better man after meeting someone whose example challenged everything he believed he already knew. The ballroom remained completely silent until the final words left his lips. Then, one by one, people rose from their chairs. Students stood first, followed by teachers, volunteers, donors, executives, and finally every guest in attendance. The standing ovation echoed through the ballroom not for wealth, influence, or status, but for two people who had chosen integrity over pride and understanding over prejudice. Monica walked onto the stage with tears quietly shining in her eyes. She thanked the audience, reminded everyone that every scholarship represented countless acts of kindness performed by ordinary people, and gently reached for Ethan's hand. There were no dramatic declarations because none were necessary. Their story had never been about proving critics wrong. It had always been about allowing respect to replace assumption and allowing compassion to become stronger than fear. As the applause slowly faded beneath the crystal chandeliers, many guests remembered the woman in the red dress, but even more remembered the lesson her quiet courage had written upon a heart that once believed it could never change. And on that unforgettable evening, the room remembered what true dignity looks like.